Britain, the richest, largest and most influential nation of the 20th century. But nowadays, the UK isn't doing so well. From a stagnant economy, a failed healthcare system, and about 20 prime ministers within just the last week, it's clear to everyone Britain isn't doing very well. It's so bad that in the next 5 to 8 years, if current trends continue, people in Poland will on average be richer than their British counterparts. But how did this happen? And is there anything they can do to save themselves? You cannot speak about Britain without mentioning the Brexit disaster. The negative effects of this are felt even to this day. A lack of high and low-skilled workers choosing to trade with Australia, which is on the other side of the fucking planet, instead of trading more with France. That's so close you can literally swim to it. And even though Britain was a net contributor into the European Union, not many people know that Europe was very effective at dealing with regional inequality in Britain, and actually they had achieved a lot of progress, catching up the countryside to London and other metropolitan areas. But with the nation leaving the Union, the politicians of the UK were left alone to deal with this problem. And as everyone already knows, they aren't the most capable people for the job. This is the Gini coefficient. I won't explain how it works, because let's be honest, you wouldn't understand. But basically, the closer it is to 1, the more unequal a nation is, and the closer to 0, the more equal. Out of all the nations in the G7, Britain is second only to America in inequality, and we all know how equal that nation is. But the type of inequality found in Britain is the worst kind. It's regional inequality. To put this in perspective, if you took out London from Britain, the standards of living would drop so dramatically that the average resident of Britain would be poorer than the people living in the poorest US state, Mississippi. And not only that, but they would actually be poorer than every single region in the Netherlands. Southern England and especially London have always been the center of the British economy. It's the most populated city where the Industrial Revolution started, and nowadays it's one of the most important financial centers on the planet. But it's very clear to everyone that the entire economy is over-reliant on the city, and all the other regions have been left behind. The worst part is that British politicians aren't taking any measure on solving this issue. In fact, it's clear to everyone British politicians have no idea what the fuck is going on. Who is the Prime Minister? This guy, or this guy? Oh, it's this guy. Yeah, let's see how long he lasts. I give him 2 months at most. The fact is that the nation, ever since 2008, has been in a catastrophically bad position. And even though I like to hate on politicians, reality is there is very little they can do. No matter how smart and capable you are, when you take over a failed nation, no matter what you do, it will remain a failed nation. So they keep repeating the same cycle. New government gets in power with plans to improve the nation. They realize the nation is complete and utter garbage, so they can't fix it. The people get angry at the politicians, they vote a new guy as president, and the cycle repeats itself forever. Maybe it's because they all have chronic brain damage due to how dysfunctional the NHS is, which is another topic for discussion. British people are sick, and not sick and tired of living there, but sick as in they need medical attention, due to them having one of the highest obesity rates on the world. Dealing with the coronavirus spectacularly bad and lack of funding into healthcare, Britain is facing a chronic illness epidemic. After the pandemic, hundreds of thousands of people every year have left the labor force because of some kind of illness, and those numbers haven't come back down at all. In fact, they keep rising and rising. Comparing them to Spain, which also saw a mass exodus from the workforce, it becomes clear Britain is doing something wrong. While most people are returning to work in Spain, more and more people are reporting chronic illness in Britain. It's also believed that aside from the fact that Brits are some of the most unhealthy people on the planet, a lot of the people that are on government welfare are just taking advantage of the very generous system while not having any serious illness, further diminishing government resources. Speaking of government resources, Britain is in a very bad situation. On the one hand, the nation can't raise taxes any further. The nation has a personal income tax of 45%, which is comparable with Luxembourg, which is the richest state in the entire world. And on the other side, government programs aren't getting nearly enough funding, with the NHS being the most obvious example of underfunding. The agency is understaffed, lacks vital infrastructure, suffers from supply chain issues, and you often need to wait months to get an appointment, while at the same time the doctors working there aren't being paid enough, leading to Britain to take on more and more debt every single year, which only grows their debt obligation. And if Greece is anything to go by, this definitely won't end well for them. At the core of this issue lies the slow growth in worker productivity, or in other words, how much a worker earned per hour worked. Before 2008, the UK was actually growing quite fast for a developed nation, but everything changed in 2008, similarly to what happened to Japan in the mid-90s. Worker productivity just flattened, and ever since then has shown very little growth, meaning that the only way to grow your economy is to either make people work more hours, which is not very politically popular, or grow the population. And because Britain has one of the worst fertility rates on the planet, that population growth can only come from migration, and that is also very politically unpopular, because the Brits are a bunch of racist pigs. While other nations have also experienced slowed growth in their productivity the last few decades, in Britain the situation is much worse, and there is no indication of it getting better. It's not very well understood what exactly caused this, as it involves millions of different factors, but some of the main ones are a weak stock market, very expensive housing and high taxation. It's very hard for British firms to acquire the necessary investments they need to jumpstart operations, and even if they somehow manage to do so, all of their profits will end up being stolen by the government in taxes, or by some greedy landlord that randomly decides to raise rent prices. If you also account for the fact it's incredibly hard to spread your business to the wider European market due to Brexit, any entrepreneur with big dreams won't even think of starting a business on top of that shithole, and instead will resort to moving to somewhere where his talents will be rewarded instead of being taken advantage of, like in the UK. All of that, along with the fact that their empire has all but disappeared, and the fact two of its former colonies are more geopolitically relevant on the global stage than itself, means that what was once the mighty British Empire has become just a shadow of its former self. So, is there anything Britain can do to start growing again? Probably not, but I guess they can at least try. Firstly, minimizing regional inequality is key to achieve any kind of growth, and they can learn a lot about this from how Germany handled the reunification of West and East Germany in 1991. It wasn't easy, but after spending 3 decades and more than $2 trillion, I can confidently say the regions are still very divided. By just looking at a map, you can see that politically, economically, religiously, and in nearly every other way, the regions are still worlds apart, and that's because reuniting people that lived under different economic and political systems for more than 4 decades is incredibly hard, but at least they have made a lot of progress. East Germany went from an underdeveloped, centrally planned economy to being richer than most regions of the United Kingdom. The UK has much less work to do. Even though the regions in the north of the country are still very poor, they are nowhere near the levels East Germany was in before reunification, and if they start nowadays, in a few decades, we might see a much more equal nation. Secondly, rejoining the EU, or at least repairing relationships and starting to trade with the bloc more often, is also vital for the economic recovery of the country. Thirdly, the government needs to change. As I previously mentioned, UK politics is more of a joke than American politics, and they have to choose between an orange man that got shot,
Sleepy Dro tried to sleep me, but he shooters ain't shit. Still standing right here with my right ear clipped, fist up in the air. Yeah, little bitch, you missed.
and a 127-year-old man with dementia. Oh, never mind, he dropped out. Now they have this dumb fuck that laughs like a maniac.
You think you just fell out of a coconut tree?
So clearly, when America looks like a well-functioning democracy compared to you, you know very well something is wrong with you. A new party just took over the nation, they won a majority in the parliament and seem somewhat popular, and they at least have a plan for the nation. Even though I've hated on the UK the entire video, it's important to acknowledge Britain still is a rich and very developed nation compared with the rest of the world, but it's also true that in the last few decades it has drastically underperformed expectations, and one of the places it has underperformed the most is in developing tech giants like America and China. But that seems to be more of a wider European problem and not just a British one. So if you want to learn how the rest of the continent has been performing the last few decades, click here or click here and watch something else.